Today on Perth Property Hub, I'll be speaking with Michelle Maynard, partner at Carbon Group. Michelle is a tax and accounting expert who gives advice to small and medium-sized businesses and property investors. You'll often see Michelle popping up across various forms of media, and she is the 9 News finance expert. Today with Michelle, we'll be talking about the pros and cons around purchasing a property inside a self-managed super fund. Hi Michelle, thanks so much for coming on to Perth Property Hub today.
Thank you for having me.
So today the topic I want to discuss is self-managed super funds. So many of my clients come to me looking to buy a residential investment property under their super fund, and I'm interested to hear your opinion on whether that should be beneficial or maybe not so.
Sure. So self-managed super funds are a really complex area, and it comes down to a lot of rules, but the main one is called the sole purpose test. And what that means is your self-managed super fund needs to have the sole purpose of providing for your retirement when you get to that age. So there are a lot of rules around what you can put into a super fund and what you can do with it when it's in there. So you are definitely able to have a residential investment property, either long-term rent or short stay holiday accommodation. That is an option to have it into a self-managed super fund, but there are a lot of complex rules that people need to be aware about because it's not as simple as owning it in your own name.
And I know often clients say to me, oh, I want to buy that holiday home in Dunsborough. Can they go and live in it in between other short-term tenancies?
They can't, and whether it's a short stay or even a long-term rental, the rules with your self-managed super fund assets is you aren't able to access them before retirement age. So if you had a holiday home, even if you couldn't find a tenant for that week in June when it's raining, you are not under any circumstances able to use it for your personal enjoyment. So no, you can't just pop down to Dunsborough for a weekend and have a stay.
I know when it comes to the cost of setting up a self-managed super fund, it can be quite expensive, and I see that a lot myself when I'm setting up the limited recourse borrowing arrangement inside of super, which in itself is really expensive, and people often don't realise that it's potentially, a couple of $1,000s in application and valuation fees, and then often the interest rates are also higher. What about getting it started?
Yeah, a lot of people don't realise they're comparing the fees that they get charged on their industry supers or their retail supers, and they think a self-managed super fund is going to be cheaper. It's not, and there are a couple of stages of fees that you need to think about. Because of the Royal Commission, the rules are now you have to go and obtain financial advice from a planner to say whether a self-managed super fund is something that should be in your financial plan. That can be a couple of $1,000s just for that advice there. Then you have the setup fees, and that's about the legal fees to get it all organised. And again, that can be somewhere from $2,000 if it's got a limited recourse borrowing arrangement. It can be another $1,000 or so on top of that. That's just to get it started. The other thing people don't really realise with a self-managed super fund is it needs to have financial statements and tax returns prepared every year, and then those need to be audited by a third-party auditor. So again, you're looking at $2,500, $3,000 upwards every single year. So they are not by any means a cheap option, and you need to factor those costs in when you're looking at whether it's a good return on investment.
And also for the individuals that are looking at buying a residential investment property, of course, if it's in their self-managed superannuation fund and it's highly geared or negatively geared, then they're not able to claim those the negative gearing aspect against their individual incomes, are they?
Absolutely not. So a self-managed super fund is its own separate legal entity. So any assets in there, the income and expenses are assessed to it in the tax return. So if you have a negatively geared rental property in a self-managed super fund, effectively what that's doing is eating away your retirement balance because your contributions that you make to that fund are having to prop up the shortfall between rent and expenses. The other part of that too is you don't want a negatively geared rental property in a self-managed super fund because it goes against the sole purpose test. It goes against the notion that your super should be growing to support you in retirement, especially those that are coming to retirement age. Having a highly geared property in a self-managed super fund is not going to enable you to pay out pension payments if you get to that stage. So you need to really think about these things long term. A lot of people say we're not going to have something that gives us great returns because there's capital value in the long term and they want to develop it, but that comes with its own complex issues inside a self-managed super fund.
Absolutely, and I know for some clients they're looking at buying a property that might be able to be developed. So they think, oh okay, well I've seen this residential investment property that's able to be subdivided. Then they come to me and want to borrow the money to buy it in the first place. But they can't actually develop it while there's a limited recourse borrowing arrangement in place, can they?
They can't. So the rules are with an asset in a self-managed super fund is while there is debt on it, you can't alter it. So if you buy a block of land that has a mortgage on it, until that mortgage is completely paid off, you can't build on it. You can't, or if you buy a residential home that needs to be altered or you want to subdivide the back block, again, while there is debt on that property, you can't change the asset at all. So people need to factor that into their planning. If they want to buy a property within their self-managed super fund, you either need to be able to do it with your super balance as it is, or have that paid off in a very short amount of time before you can do anything to it.
And what about commercial property? Because a lot of my clients who are small business owners, that's an area where I think buying their own commercial premises inside of a self-managed super fund can be beneficial?
Absolutely. We have a lot of small business clients as well that normally operate, say, through a trust or a company structure, but they're renting the premises that they operate from. So in that respect, a commercial property can fit really well within a self-managed super fund because the rules are a little bit different. And so if you look at it from a group perspective, it's great because you're paying rent on something that you can use, you're allowed to actually use, but you have to pay market rent, and that's a real key thing here. You need to have documentation to prove that you are paying what you would have rented that commercial premises to a third party for. So commercial property inside a self-managed super fund still needs structure and planning, but definitely far more beneficial than looking at residential property inside a self-managed super fund.
So as just a really sort of clear breakdown of that, basically if it's a residential investment property, you can't use it. But if it's a commercial property that you're planning to run your business from, if your business is paying market rent, that's acceptable for you to use the property, because there's a lot of confusion around that.
There is, absolutely, and that's exactly how it is. Residential, you are not allowed to use it at all. Business premises, under the business premises test, as long as you're paying market rent, then absolutely you can use a property that you own through a self-managed super fund.
So Michelle, I guess in closing, there are so many complex issues with self-managed super funds and limited recourse borrowing arrangements in order to help people buy property in their self-managed super funds. So what I would simply say to people is they need to get in touch and sit down with you or their accountant and have that really detailed conversation around whether it's actually going to be beneficial to them from a tax perspective or not.
Absolutely. I think always getting advice before you do anything is key, but definitely when you're looking at self-managed super funds, you really need that before you make a decision so you know whether it's going to be worthwhile or not.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much again for coming on to Perth Property Hub today.
Thank you.